Hello, FewCandy here, and welcome back to Solitude. And I know the episodes have been few and far between recently, but we are continuing this series. I am committed to making more episodes. I've just got too many series on the go to make them absolutely every single week along with everything else. So I hope you can bear with me and you're still enjoying our build out of Solitude. I'm still having an absolute ton of fun with it, and now that we've got our central downtown kind of sorted-ish, finished, the central part at least, we're going to move our attention back over to this little area that I left next to the port. Well, I say I left it, I just dumped in a fishing harbour, which we're going to completely sort out and redesign today. And just before we do that, I do just want to say that we have had some sightings of some FewCandy trucks and some Jack Squirtle trucks driving around Solitude, with a massive thank you to Terry for making those assets. It's incredibly satisfying to just keep seeing little tiny sneaky peeks of these wonderful custom assets, so thank you so much for the time and dedication to making those. So the plan for today is we are going to actually be putting in the world's smallest ore industry into this area. And yes, it is going to be fully functional. We'll have glass production, metal production, an ore mine, the full works. But it's going to be tiny, it's going to be intricate, and it's going to be really carefully designed. And the reason for this actually, again, is me taking inspiration from Wellington in New Zealand. I have had so much fun exploring this city on Google Earth. It is incredible. But this little area next to the port, which again we took inspiration for our Solitude port there, has this really cool kind of little stone quarry next to it. That's what it looks like to me anyway, and it's got some nice features like the rail line running into it. We're not going to do that here, but I am going to kind of take this design and make it fit into Solitude. So we're starting off the build today by sorting out this fishing. So we had originally put in a shellfish fishing harbour, and I've also added in an anchovy because I thought actually having two right next to each other would look pretty good if we had one line flowing throughout the kind of bay area and the shellfish obviously going further out to sea. Then that kind of spreads out our fishing boats and also gives us obviously two different types of fish there. Not that that really matters for the game at all. And the little trick I used to put the assets super close together was when I was in Move It, if you hold Alt on your keyboard and hover over the road, you can then select the road and not the actual harbour asset. And this goes for anything which has a road attached to it. And then you can click Delete and Move It and it will remove that road. And then you can just draw in your own road and it will be connected absolutely fine, no problem at all. So that's what we've done here to get these harbours right up next to each other and obviously replace those vanilla roads with our industrial one. And then of course I wanted to come in and add in quaywall along here because it makes sense next to the harbour. This is all at a slightly different level, so slightly lower down because I needed to lower the land to get the fishing harbours to look sensible, because the fishing boats are tiny and if the fishing harbours are too high up it just looks a bit ridiculous, so I tried to get them as close as I could to the water's edge. They're probably still in reality a little bit high, but we have to work with what the game's got and this is the easiest way to do it. And then you can see me here starting to add in our ore industry. So we've plopped in a main building, of course we need that for the industrial area to function. And then I've also added a large sand storage unit area as well, which I thought would look quite nice. The piles of sand in it are quite aesthetic, and with a few decals we can kind of rough it up and help it fit in. I've also added an oil storage, you will see, so that was just because I like the aesthetic of the barrels down here, but also quite useful for it to be close to the harbour. Now the next thing is of course a lot of flooding, which comes with terraforming out the piece of land that I wanted to put our quarry onto. And this was a bit tricky, like you'll see here I'm trying to smooth off the land underneath because of the theme we've got. All of the cliffs are dark green, which looks super weird underwater. So a lot of smoothing was involved there and quite a lot of playing around with the landscape to try and get this to look right on top of the water and underneath it. Now you would have seen on Google Earth at the start that there was a kind of cliff face around this quarry with a bit of sand around the edge and some rocks spilling down. That's exactly what I wanted to try and achieve here in Cities Skylines. So you can see here I've tried to terraform in a kind of circular cliff area as a boundary to our quarry, and then trying to get a nice sort of low down to the ocean level piece of sand around it, and this was tricky to say the least. I actually cut out quite a bit of me playing around with that in the end because it's fairly monotonous to watch and it did take an awfully long time. But we did eventually get it in kind of how I wanted. I appreciate it looks super duper weird with all the green cliff, and we'll come on to that. I have a trick in store and in mind to cover those up. We'll come back to that. So I wanted importantly to make sure that there was a road connection through here going into what I think will probably be a kind of almost low wealth suburb actually. maybe some nicer beach houses around next to it. So I just placed in this road that I wanted to flow round the outside of our little ore mine here, and then went ahead and placed in the medium ore mine. And the reason for this is just it's got that working crane, so I think it's going to look really nice. I could have done this entire thing with props, but obviously this is going to be functional. I did also need to add ore into this area because of course there wasn't any here originally. This wasn't kind of in my original plan when I was making the map. So we actually had oil here. But then placing this in, we obviously need to get road access to it, but all the props I found on the front of it quite limiting. So I decided to get rid and bob off all of those props. For the fences though, they are actually the built-in ore fence, so you do need to unlock those with network multi-tool, and then you can delete those out. And then of course we proceeded to bob off all of the remaining props on the front, so that we can then create quite an organic shape and pattern around this structure. So just thinking about the roads, I wanted them to kind of be sort of visible in and amongst all of our different ore piles. So I just used the gravel road here, which we can cover up and blend in with a bit of decals later on, and have this flow around the complex. And then also keeping my Google Earth reference in mind, I did decide to put one of these roads up kind of on top of the cliff actually, so we're getting some different layers in and amongst the roads within the ore mine. So it's almost like they're digging out of the landscape, and the sort of edge of the complex that we're leaving here has yet to be dug out. And that again is how this looks on Google Earth in Wellington in real life, so I think it adds a nice effect to it and a nice dynamic having these different layers. So I did experiment with a few different kind of surface painting techniques, and what I found is actually main surface painter, even in ruined or gravel, just looked very flat. So I decided to cover it all up with these dirt decals from Ronix, which has kind of little stones in them as well, which I thought was quite appropriate around the quarry area. And then did a little bit of ruined surface painter underneath to get rid of some of the grass sprites, but I really liked how they kind of sat poking out in different areas. So we've got a few little grass sprites poking through as the jungle of Solitude kind of blends into everything. And for these cliffs on the outside, I used this rock decal to cover up the green cliff texture that we have on our theme, because it was really the only way we could do it other than placing a bunch of rocks over them as we do in other places. But I felt like those seawall rocks kind of looked a little bit too man-made. So yeah, this decal felt better. And then actually using the vanilla rocks from the sort of destroyed rocks props to add a little bit of extra dynamic to the decals, I think worked really nicely. Like, I love how these little cliff edges look. And it's not as sharp as the cliff on Google Earth. That would be quite difficult to do in Cities Skylines. You could of course use terraforming networks to place those in, but I decided not to and just went for this slightly more organic look. And then on top of these rocks, I decided to place in some larger rocks. So we use a couple of the seawall rocks to add again another extra dynamic layer to our little water's edge here on the sand, and there's some larger rocks sprinkled in around it, all kind of carefully placed. Some of the larger broken up rock assets just didn't feel right and felt a little bit too kind of big and manufactured, so I found it a better look to individually place these singular rocks all the way around, which was relatively time consuming, but I think the effect of it in the end is really, really nice. Like, love, love, love how this coastline came out. And particularly when you can see some of those grass sprites poking through the top of the cliffs, I really like that effect. Like, the sprites actually are working so well in Solitude. I usually turn them off, I usually hide them, but not here, definitely not here. And then before we come in to detail up our quarry area and place a gazillion piles in there to make it messy and dirty and realistic, I wanted to make sure that we had a fully functional and efficient for the city or area in here. So I added in a glass manufacturing plant to start off with, and then also made sure that we had some metals facility next to it. We don't have an ore industry yet in Solitude, and we will have more. We'll have some kind of mountainous quarries, I think, at some point as well. Probably quite a few little small ones dotted around the map, rather than anything too large, I think, for Solitude. But I did want to make sure that we had this in now and it was functional and giving us all the products we need, so we could put in more factories if we wanted to as well, with the glass and the metal products that it produces. So this was really important that we incorporated these into here. So I decided to integrate them into a little independent industrial area slightly up the slope from the quarry as well. Again, just adding more layers into the build, I think, is always a nice dynamic. And then we're adding more industry buildings in around it, just generic industry. And actually some of Ibanya's Industrial Evolution assets work super well in here. Like, I change out this big warehouse I've just placed for one of those because it just looks actually so much better. Those assets are gorgeous. And I really wanted to make sure the glass and the metal blended in and they weren't kind of too sore thumb-like sitting on top of the cliff next to the quarry here and kind of obviously placed as part of what the game needs. I wanted it to feel like a natural and organic development around the quarry of various different industries up here, and definitely going for the more warehouse style assets I think works well. Of course, we do also need warehouses for the metal and the glass products, so we do come onto that as well later on. And just down by the fishing, I have placed in a warehouse for the fish products there too. So that keeps our fishing industry working pretty efficiently there. So I had noticed where we placed in the oil storage here that some of the surface painting built into the asset was actually climbing up the cliff towards the road. I did not like this, so we used a bit of surface painter to remove the actual surface on the asset itself, but then with that it produces some pretty jaggedy lines. We can't then use brush tool to tidy it up, so you see me here placing in a lot of undergrowth and some bushes spilling through the fence, which again is a vibe that I really love in Solitude, that jungle spilling into all of the assets here. Absolutely can. That was a great way to cover up some of the flaws actually in the surface painting around those buildings there. And then now we are finally adding in those warehouses for our metal and for our glass products up here as well, which I think blend really nicely into this district. And one of my favourite things actually about this little raised industry here is the view from the main road behind it, which is kind of the main road flowing round the edge of the volcano peninsula, if that's what we're going to call it. And you can see these big industrial buildings poking right up next to the road. Like, it's a super cool dynamic. Viewpoints are always something that's very important to me when I'm building out anything really. I love being able to pop in a car and drive around Solitude and have it feel really realistic and alive, and you can notice different things from any road at any point. And now we're just coming in, of course, and covering up some of this green cliff texture to make it feel a little bit more man-made and a bit more kind of proper around the edge of our industry area. And I would just like to take a little opportunity to say that if you are enjoying the video, please do drop me a like and a comment. And if you're new to the channel, hit subscribe. We're super close to 30,000 subscribers. So if you feel like you'd enjoy more of the Solitude series and my other Cities Skylines and Cities Skylines 2 content, please do hit that subscribe button. So I didn't want the rocks all the way around the complex. I definitely wanted to bring in some of that jungle. So you'll see just behind the main building here, which I've placed strategically by the entrance to kind of act as a foreman's building, I guess you could say, to the main complex. We just brought in the jungle around it, which I think adds a really nice dynamic, bringing in some of that green to very heavily concreted grey areas. So now it is time to start the piles placement. That's what we're going to call it around our ore industry area. And I did just decide to use Avania's piles here, the sand, the concrete. We actually mix in a little bit of coal and iron as well, just to get some different colours. Looking at Google Earth again, the ore mine in Wellington very much has different colours of sand is what it looks like, or rock or concrete, whatever it might be. So that's what we've gone for here, and I think it looks pretty good actually mixing in a few different colours, and I particularly like the one-off dark piles of coal and iron that we add in around the place. I do use Move It just to change the size of some of them so we get a little bit more variety than just having a small and a medium asset of each. I felt like actually the medium one wasn't even that big really for what I wanted, and particularly in and around the crane that we have in the middle. So to do that, you just simply click on a prop, because these act as props of course, while you're in Move It, and then press the full stop key or the comma key if you want to make a prop smaller while you're in Move It, while you have it selected in Move It. So yeah, great little trick there for changing the size of props, and particularly these piles to help them fit in a bit better. And then I think the most difficult thing about this entire build was actually blending the piles into the surface underneath it. So I did use the ruined surface painter texture across the whole complex, and then covered that up with a bunch of decals, which you'll see later on in the time lapse. But the piles still felt very kind of like blocky, and they needed something at the bottom of them. So I do fix that later on, but it took a while to find the right assets to do this. And I still think actually in the end, some of them don't look as kind of blended on the outside of them as I would hope them to. You will see here as well, I'm bringing in a few trees, because that was one thing again that I noticed from my trip to Google Earth, was there was actually like a row of trees in and amongst this ore mine, and quite a lot of greenery around it as well. And bringing that in, I think, added a really, really nice dynamic, again, similar to what we did around the main building. Just having those pops of green in and amongst all this kind of heavy industry, I think brings it alive. And again, it does feel realistic, even though it wasn't my instinct to put trees in the middle of this complex. But then the road driving into it as well, as you drive past the trees on one side, does look really cool. And now obviously we're going to place a lot of props around this complex, as I always do in industry areas to bring it to life. And one particular thing that I noticed on Google Earth was there was a massive pile of tyres sat at the back of the ore mine. Now I cannot tell you why on earth that would be here or what use that was to the industry in this place, but it's there, so that's what I've gone for here too. But I absolutely love those tyre assets, and so I'm happy to place piles of tyres in wherever they may be needed. And I kind of feel in Solitude as well, being a tropical climate, the roads would be hot, your tyres would wear down pretty quickly. So maybe there are just loads of random tyres and old burnt out tyres piled up all over the place across the city. So of course, with this being an industry area, I felt the need to place in a whole bunch more props to bring it to life. So we brought in a kind of a foreman's hut for the actual ore mine over here. So just a little mobile home shed office. A few little prop sims around it, of course, just to give it some character and create a little bit of a storyline, if you can imagine, around the quarry. Like, what's going on here? What are the conversations that are happening? That's one thing I absolutely love about placing prop sims in and doing funny things with them. We've got such a wide variety of prop sims available on the workshop now. It is fantastic. Of course, there's all the rest of my usual industrial detailing. So we bring in some mobile lights, a water tank, lots of crates and forklifts, some kind of more heavy industry things like pipes and steel girders and things like that I think work well around these areas. And I saw quite a few steel girders or what looked like that sort of thing on Google Earth as well. Of course, there's the need for forklifts, as we mentioned, dumper trucks, any kind of like scoopy truck. I don't know the technical term for them. Things that are going to move the piles around and shift them into place and organise things and pack it into containers or whatever it is that they're doing with it. I don't know the ins and outs of this, but I'm using my imagination to bring it together. And of course, let's not forget my favourite thing, which is trash. I think trash really helps to bring an area to reality. Like, industry areas are dirty, things are piled up. Maybe it's kind of not domestic trash, which some of this looks like, but there are just things lying around, and that's really the kind of dynamic that I like to get in an industry area. Like, cluttered stuff, lots of things, but also organised as well, so things are put in the correct place and make sense for why they're there, like they're tucked away at the back of the industry area or at the side somewhere behind a building, that sort of thing. That's where I really like to place in a lot of my trash. But I really do think that it does add an extra dynamic to industry areas, in particular actually the back of commercial areas and things. You would have seen me do it actually throughout the downtown too. In real life, I'm one of these people that is so vehemently against people littering and dropping rubbish, so it's kind of ironic that I come into this game and put trash absolutely everywhere. But unfortunately, it is a sad reality of cities and areas that we live in, particularly more deprived countries as well, where trash collection isn't so much of a common thing or isn't as well established as we find in Western countries. Like, these things do happen, and Solitude being a tropical place, I feel like is appropriate, particularly for this city. Now I am going to leave you to enjoy the rest of the detailing before we come back and have a little explore around of the finished build, but it's a lot of detailing, that's really what I'll say. A huge amount of decals, a huge amount of props, and trying to bring that Solitude greenery in wherever we can, making sure that, you know, things are overgrown where they need to be. There's maybe piles of stuff by the roads that maybe ordinarily wouldn't make sense, but in Solitude it does, because space is limited, particularly in this area. And maybe they're not quite as organised as some other companies, shall we say, down here. So that is really very much the focus of the detailing time-lapse here, just bringing in all of those little extra things that really bring a build to life. So just before we get on to exploring the build, I did want to talk about the name, and we have gone for naming it after one of my long-standing Patreons actually, David Shot. So we have got the Shot Glass Co over here in our little ore mine. I kind of nod to the Shot Glass Company in Oregon as well actually. And I have decided to name this the Shot Port as well in honour of you, David. Thank you. It's just so much for your absolutely insane, generous support over a long time now. So I really appreciate it. And I hope you like having a second glass company in one of my modded Cities series. So let's just take a little look around, shall we? And starting from over here, looking this way, I'm loving this view with the glass manufacturing plant there and the ore mine fully functional in the background. Looks awesome. But yeah, we just got a little pile of steel girders here. I mean, why not? I'm thinking maybe they're fixing out the port key edge or something like that. It's just kind of like little storage piles next to the road is what I was noticing on Google Earth, so I've kind of gone for quite a few little elements of that here, and it sort of helps to cover up the fact that this land is a little bit bumpy in between the quay and the road here, which I just couldn't seem to get rid of in the game. I've also added in these little tugboats around the fishing harbour, so a couple down here as well, and of course these little boat pools as well around that, which just gives a nice effect here. Could kind of be a maintenance area, I suppose, for the larger port, and definitely somewhere where we can keep our tugboats stored for some of those large container ships. Of course, we just got a little bit of prop detailing around here. I'm really liking actually how this ore entrance building is sitting in. Just a little bit of fencing around it, a few decals to rough it up while this guy floats across the yard. That was interesting. And then just bringing in the jungle in around it and behind it, I think has worked really, really nicely there. So I'm pleased with that effect, particularly the little wooden fences. And then we come on down here. Obviously, we've got our big steel fence, our chain link fence all the way around it. Again, just a few little extra props and parking spaces and things like that. I probably ought to bob off that barrel because that doesn't make a huge amount of sense there. But it seems to be working nicely. I was just thinking, is he going to drive into the trailer? I think he just missed it. But yeah, I think the warehouse buildings fit in nicely with the oil barrels behind it. These are just a few generic industry buildings actually off the workshop, which create a nice little sort of warehouse look there too. Of course, we've got the fishing harbours in here and then more tugboats with another crane, kind of bringing in the port element to this, but obviously much smaller, low-key, meant for smaller boats over here with a much lower down quay. A few little parking spaces up against next to it, which I thought was nice. And again, just with the ore storage, the sand storage here, all I've done is just add a few little decals to take away the kind of plain nature of that gravel texture that we had in here as part of the original asset. Do you know what? I don't think I've ever looked at this so closely to notice the sand actually tipping out of there. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. But I think that's kind of sitting quite snugly with these retaining sort of man-made rock walls around them. I'm enjoying that. And then particularly this bit actually, when we come up here, where we've got the mixture of the ruined texture with the grass bites poking through, it all looks a little bit overgrown and sandy and dusty and dirty, so I'm enjoying that a lot. So we come up to more warehouses and of course the ore industry manufacturing plants. And just to show you this little view up this road as well, which I'd mentioned was really quite nice. Yeah, as you drive in here, you get these sort of shots of these warehouses in the foreground and the road starts to kind of snake its way slightly up the hill. You see the ore manufacturing, the glass plant and the metal plant there as well. We put in some fencing with IMT along here and it just all works really quite nicely. And then you start to get the shots of the downtown in the background as well, which, yeah, very much enjoying that, particularly with the cranes out the front too. Some of those sight lines are turned out really nice actually. Over here, very much more of the same, just lots of prop details out the back of here, a little bit of trash and some skips. I decided to put in quite a few of these pipe props because I thought maybe they're making concrete of some description, so we've got a load of concrete pipes, maybe that's their main kind of product that they're producing over in this area. And I did decide to bring in a very small recycling plant here too, because we started to get some garbage piling up. It's fairly far away from other garbage resources, so I thought this was needed in this area. This has fitted in really nicely actually. A few little props in the random space in between it with a bit of surface painting, again a little bit of those dirt decals over the gravel has really blended this into the space, so it doesn't feel like that kind of very obvious square block that we plopped in originally. It feels quite nice there, yeah. And then coming on to a bit more concrete kind of yards, and actually appropriately, we have got nice pipes in here. I'm pretty sure this is storing metal, so appropriate product for what we want in here, but it's worked out very nicely indeed. And then much of the same up here, like I said, more pipes, a bit of trash, a truck, crates, lots of pallets around here as well, around these different warehouses. But yeah, enjoying it. And then of course the main event really, which was our ore mine. And like I said, I just absolutely love how this coastline has turned out with those tiny little destroyed rocks, just the vanilla prop that is. Works super nicely here, mixed in with some of those larger rocks, just carefully placed, and even some of the little like the key ones that we use for kind of key walls in here too. It's definitely the effect that I was going for, so yeah, enjoying that. Obviously our little tyre pile over here too, with some dumper trucks. I do like that you can just about see this track through some of the decals. I had to actually move some of them. I'd probably overdone it a little bit to make sure that you could see those tracks coming through, because I think that makes it feel a little bit more used and dirty, and would be like this obviously with tyres and things running up and down these different tracks going throughout the complex. But yeah, really pleased with how this little area has turned out with the ginormous piles as we come on through. The little bit of greenery works super nicely too. And of course then we've actually got our ore area workers running around here, which is lovely to see. Just our prop sims adding to that in various different places too. Whole bunch of trash around the back here because why not? And these little grass sprites, this is what I was talking about, just using Surface Painter to minimise them, so they're just poking up every now and then through the kind of texture. Very much enjoying that. It feels quite nice and natural. But there we go, we have got our smallest ore mine ever, but actually really efficient. Like everything's super close to each other, we've got everything in that we need to. Okay, we don't have a workers' barracks or a maintenance yard, but they're not essential to make it operate and work efficiently. We're going to have a look actually at the info. We have got up to level 2. We'd need a few more workers, so we'd need to expand it to get anything past that, but I'm not too worried about that really. Like, we seem to be importing a lot, but I think that's because the warehouses are importing. Oh, see, that's just flipped, in fact. We're now not importing anything. So there we go. It does seem to be working pretty nicely and efficiently. But that is going to be it for today, so if you have enjoyed the episode, likes, comments and shares are really greatly appreciated, and do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Help us get to that 30,000 massive milestone. But that is all from me for now, so thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you again next time. Bye bye!